Hey everyone, today on our show we have Tim Boyle, co-founder at Whiparound. Now, Whiparound is an intuitive and easy to use fleet management tool that enables users to more effectively and efficiently complete vehicle and asset inspections and maintenance, eliminating all the manual processes and paperwork. Now, Tim is originally from New Zealand, coming from an industrial real estate background, and now has a successful startup in the US. So I'm super excited to dive into his journey and see what we can learn. Tim, welcome to the show.
Shaheem, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining. So Tim, let's dive right in. Let's talk about how you founded Whiparound.
Well, I guess I have to give some credit to my co-founder, and I think more often than not these days you see co-founders because it often takes more than one brain to kick these things off. My co-founder James worked in the freight industry, and you covered it in your intro there a bit. That Whiparound services the transport sector. We focus on the fleet inspection and maintenance management kind of aspect of operations. And my co-founder James worked for some of the largest freight companies down here in this part of the world. You mentioned New Zealand, and that's where I'm currently sitting at the moment, which isn't a huge market in itself, but we're pretty close to Australia, which has a little bit more grunt. And there was a change in legislation here around health and safety at work, and we just talked and discussed the problems that he was seeing in his day-to-day role with these freight companies, that this high volume, low margin industry was being slowed down by paper processes, by compliance, by obligations related to safety. And we knew that technology could solve that problem in a much better way than it did. And I guess that was the spark that kind of led us on the journey to developing the initial concepts of Whiparound. And as I'm sure we'll talk to a little bit more, how we ended up very quickly operating in the US market instead of down here.
Yeah, no, that's great. But you're not coming from that freight background, right?
I'm not. You mentioned I was a real estate agent for 11 years, and I was working with a lot of freight companies. So what I was doing for a big global US company called CBRE was working with large logistics companies and finding space for them. So third-party logistics operators, manufacturers, leasing, warehousing, and it's quite a technical process when you get to some of the larger end operators. So I had a great exposure to trucking, to freight, to transport, to heavy industry in general. But it was definitely James that was putting on a high-vis jacket every day and living and breathing the freight world from the ground.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So let's talk about that journey. You started this in New Zealand, and then at some point decided to expand to Australia and then the US. Let's talk about that journey and what you learned along the way.
When we were conceiving the original idea of Whiparound, we saw the problem here. We believed that a change in legislation in the environment, it had just happened in Australia. There was some big energized focus around chain of responsibility and documenting that in a way that made businesses, and particularly in heavy industry, more accountable. That was starting, or was sort of being threatened to happen here in New Zealand, and companies were adjusting to a new normal in terms of health and safety. And in the trucking industry, we just saw that was taking up time that we knew was so valuable to them. If they weren't on the road, if they weren't moving freight, then every minute was $1 lost. But what actually happened is, as we started conceiving the initial product and understanding some of the requirements that the industry had, we were working with some pretty large companies here in New Zealand around their fleets, Coca-Cola to name one of them, that we ended up in some pretty deep workshops on. It was actually the US that came knocking to us, and we started getting some inquiry through our website from our initial product saying, hey, we like what you're doing. It's really interesting. Do you meet some of these federal requirements in the US? And Shaheem, I'm not going to pretend you are an expert in federal transport compliance in the US, but neither were we really at that point in time. But invested a lot of time and energy to upskill ourselves on what some of these particular requirements were, that a huge proportion of the US transport market, not just trucking, but think concrete mixers and even, last mile delivery companies in some way, construction, passenger transport, utilities, everyone sort of in between, was having to meet certain requirements around a daily inspection cadence of those assets to check for things that might impact safety. And then more importantly, how the evidence and records of that inspection and their maintenance scheduling and reporting and repairs and all of those things were retained. And it was policed in a very different way than it was down here. There were investigations, which are commonly known as audits. You might get a knock on the door and say, we're coming in to give you an audit in 48 hours time. And the industry was just very much still trying to manage this onerous compliance framework using paper, using spreadsheets, using whiteboards. And we knew from very early on that what our product was seeking to solve here was a far more obvious and defined problem up in North America. And I think that was a really fortunate step for us that we were still very young. And we managed to kind of get on a plane, pivot the product, understand the compliance framework, and really push our product into the US. And now 99% of our customers are in the US. Wow. We have the sort of a US headquarters in Charlotte. We operate with teams in 4 states. So we very much are a US focused business. And it was just, I guess, a little bit of luck in there that what we thought we were solving in this part of the world was probably a far more obvious pain point to solve in the US.
Fair enough. So the opportunity kind of presented itself, and then you guys explored it further, saw the opportunity, and then went after it. No, that's great. How different is the market though when it comes to growing a company and getting sales, getting customers in the US compared to New Zealand?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you the absolute honest truth here, and hopefully there's not too many New Zealand people listening to this podcast that'll take offense, but we really appreciated the way that we were dealing with the American market. What we found here was because of the lack in compliance requirements, conversations that we were having here with trucking operators were sort of more at that vitamin end of the scale as opposed to the painkiller end of the scale. And so we were sort of saying, we've got a tool that can really help you. It's going to create efficiency, and then, come back and see us in 2 weeks' time and we'll have a think about it. And when you're trying to sell a SaaS product for, a couple of $100s a month, we knew that model wasn't really going to scale. And the conversations we were having at the same time in the US were far more commercial. We knew the pain that they were experiencing through paper-based processes, through missed maintenance management, through poor compliance, and how that could impact them through lost business, higher violation count, poor safety scores causing fines, or worse in the case of some of the large litigation and things that has happened over the years. And so that really helped draw us into the US market. Was the pain was more obvious. It was a painkiller product that we were offering, and really incentivized us to kind of focus on digging deeper in that part of the world than down here.
Gotcha. So you just found that like the pain was just bigger, the problem was just bigger in the US. And so when you're speaking to people, their reaction was just like, wow, like we need this like yesterday.
Absolutely. The market is so vast, and coming from New Zealand, we're in awe of it, obviously, quite regularly, and understanding how broad the problem that we set out to solve was. I guess transport's a really interesting, we've learned this over the years, transport is a really interesting sector in that despite the advances in autonomous trucking and all of these things that we know are probably on the horizon, it's still a very manual industry. So you still rely on somebody to load up a truck, to drive it, to deliver it, to bring that truck back to the depot again. All of these things rely on very manual processes along the way. I mean, you can't just, send an email full of lumber across the US. Right. You can't automate that. It relies on process. And so I think the industry was sort of still lagging behind other industries in some of the automation and technology that they were adopting. So to get in there at a very early adopter phase of that cycle was an exciting opportunity for us. And we saw that people were still using such manual processes in some of this compliance space, despite some, federally mandated things that had happened in 2017. The paper-based hours of service logs were pushed into a digitization process called ELD. The industry started sort of opening their eyes, saying, hey, we're digitizing our hours of service. Some people were happy with it. Some people obviously weren't. There was a bit of a big brother in there. And there's definitely some fringe use cases that I don't think the legislation really solved for. But it also opened their eyes to, hey, technology can help me and my business in a certain way. And the evolution from GPS tracking was sort of one of the key elements in that. And then the forced ELD mandate push that a bit further. And then we really came in at that moment saying, well, why aren't all of your maintenance processes digitized? And being able to tell that story and give people the ability to sort of connect whole teams, no matter where they are, around important issues, make critical decisions in real time, I think is sort of that next evolution of how transport businesses are going to be operating.
Right. And you mentioned that you kind of got in at that early adoption phase which was like, it was great for you to get in there. And I think a lot of founders like listening in, that's where they want to get into it, that early stage of the market. But I feel like it's also a double-edged sword, because when you're in the early adoption side, you have a lot of people just saying, hey, okay, well, who are your customers? Okay, well, other people aren't doing this yet. It's so new, especially in industries like supply chain, logistics. You think about like manufacturing, healthcare, all of these industries are really like late adopters. So how did you guys go about, going to market in an industry that's slow to adopt technology? What are some, I guess, practical tips and pieces of advice you can provide for founders listening in?
I think you hit a really relevant point there. Being an early adopter, you do play in a sort of land grab kind of mentality for a while, but you do have to do a lot more education as to the solution that you're selling. You have to really build awareness, but you have to coach people on what you do, why it's better, because it was amazing to us that we were looking to simply replace, in the very early days, our product now is far more mature than it once was. But in those early days, we were really saying, why don't you just stop doing your daily inspections on paper and do them on an app? And people would say, wow, if only I knew you guys existed. And to us, it was like, but surely anybody would think that in this day and age, you're sending emails, you're doing all your DocuSigns digitally, you're doing all these sort of things in a digital format. You would assume that people would be looking for a digitized version of some of these processes, but they weren't. So it costs you more to acquire customers. You have to really educate them on a journey as to why technology is the better way of doing things. And so those are things you have to figure out when you are in an industry that is somewhat of an early adopter phase. But the good thing about transport is that particularly at the heavier end of the industries that we operate in, given the high level of compliance and safety sort of thresholds and requirements, a lot of the information is publicly available. So in the very early days, we were going out sort of hunting opportunities and conversations with people rather than them clicking on our EDVIR Google ad and wanting to have a chat with us. And that was a really helpful step that the FMCSA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, makes all registered carriers available through different portals. There's various information that we could understand about our market, about opportunities, about how they were performing from a compliance and safety perspective, that when we were looking to approach different companies about their performance and about how our solution might be able to solve for that, it was reasonably easy to find. And I think that was something that in hindsight, we have certainly done very well. I think now we have a far more complex kind of, marketing engine, and we want to nurture people and warm them up before we're, trying to demonstrate that what we do. But back in those days, we sent a fair few emails, that was for sure.
Yeah, for sure. The outbound grind for sure. You need to do that. So no, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. How did COVID affect the business?
It's really interesting. The fact that I'm sitting here in New Zealand, I was, spending the majority of my time in Charlotte with our team there, as were, a bunch of us from New Zealand. We've got a huge, great team based in Charlotte. We ended up there sort of by chance, actually, when we were looking to set up our team, 4 or so years ago. The guy that we ended up bringing on as our sort of employee number one, Mike, he happened to live in Charlotte, and he worked for a company that had just been acquired by Verizon called Fleetmatics. They were a market leader, multi-billion-dollar company in GPS tracking. He knew the industry. He had a network of people that, that had sold into and had relationships in the industry. So we very much wanted to follow him, and hence how we ended up in Charlotte. So ever since very early on, we have had an office here in New Zealand where our product and engineering team has been based, and we've had sort of customer success and our sales effort up in Charlotte, really focused on the US market. And so the big first kind of hurdle for us when COVID hit, I mean, I remember sitting, looking at the screens. I was in the US on the 15th of March or 13th of March, 2020. The NBA season was being cancelled. And I thought, man, I better get home. This is turning into something pretty real. And we came home, and Noah, my other business partner, who's the CEO of Whiparound, he was living in Charlotte at the time, and he came back for a wedding at exactly the same time, a friend's wedding back here in New Zealand, and didn't end up going back for nearly 2 years. And so COVID affected us in that way, that we were getting really accustomed to being on a plane, or we were living up there for, a period of time. Noah was up there full time. I was up there, every month. And that ended really abruptly. And despite our team up in the US working remotely, I guess, it still was, the time zone's pretty difficult. We were, doing lots of really crazy hours here in New Zealand, waking up early to kind of hit the time zone of our customers and our team. So that was an organizational shift that we had to, but I think that was pretty common, across a lot of companies worldwide. Industry-wise, it helped us, and we had some headwinds and some tailwinds. Unfortunately, I think the tailwinds overcame the headwinds. A lot of our customers, a chunk of our customers operated in tourism or passenger transport, the high compliance requirement in those sectors, as you can imagine. And so we had a lot of customers that were basically just furloughing staff, or, going out of business, unfortunately, or whatever that may have resulted in. And so we did wear a fair bit of headwind early on in 2020, when it was the passenger sector was basically just grinding to a halt. But what we experienced was that tidal wave of digitization. People were looking to find ways and use technology to remain distance, to go contactless. And underpinning all of that for us is we operated in an essential industry. The majority of our customers were either in last mile delivery, think Amazon DSPs or FedEx Ground, or some of these operators, your line haul truckers, who were, some of the heroes of the pandemic, carrying goods and cargo, throughout some of the darkest days in there, and into construction and some of the industries that were allowed to carry on and then got relied upon to kind of spur the economy back into gear again as light sort of shone through the end of the tunnel. Those sectors were either continuing to operate, or in many cases actually accelerated and grew over that period as e-commerce kind of became more prevalent as people were sitting at home. And I guess we benefited from that, in that there were more companies in those key sectors that we operated in. Paired with the fact that they didn't want to have all their drivers sitting in a lunchroom every morning, or handling pieces of paper across the front desk at the depot after they'd done their inspections. That's where we managed to have some conversations, and some of the other functionality in our product, I think, helped around notifications and communicating with drivers and doing all that sort of stuff. So if I had to hang my hat on something, I think the tailwind that we got from COVID was more fortunate than disadvantageous. Although, we are still really, wanting to get and see a lot of those passenger customers and tourism operators that we had on board, who hopefully now are seeing, a little bit more positivity in the future.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think also as a company, when you see your customer base affected like that, like those passenger that work in that kind of part of the industry, it's kind of sucks, right? Like, just to see your customers being like, this is their business, and like it's being affected. I'm sure that was tough, not just for yourself, but for just seeing your customers go through that.
Absolutely. You, as I'm sure you appreciate, and a lot of the people listening appreciate, you build relationships with your customers, particularly those early customers that you have on board. I've been out to see so many of them and met them, and to receive phone calls or emails saying, hey, look, we're shutting down, or we're going to have to, downsize by 90% and ride this thing out. It really was heartbreaking, because there's so many stories of, wonderful success stories that we got to see over the years, of people that have built amazing businesses, or multi-generational businesses, family businesses that this thing just came in and wiped them out. So we are doing everything we can to support the re-entry of those industries back into, operational again. And we've got some great ideas areas that we're working with our customers on. So fingers crossed there will be a happy ending for a bunch of them. But yeah, it was tough times.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Hoping for the best, for sure. So let's talk about today. Where is the product at today? What are some new problems that you're solving for your customers that you weren't solving maybe 4 years ago?
I guess one of the big shifts that we have seen over the last, even, I'll say over the last 4 or 5 years in the transport sector, and I think it's probably reflective of technology in general. So it's nothing unique, but the role that we play in maintenance management is heavily reliant on being part of an integrated ecosystem or tech stack of other transport technology. We have always wanted to focus on being a specialist, niche, depending on where you're listening from, player in that inspection and maintenance management part. We haven't gone down the path of being an ELD or GPS tracking or having hardware. We're purely cloud-based, and that set us up well to integrate with some of the more dominant transport technology out there. Think Samsara, Keep Truckin', Verizon Connect, some of these larger telematics players that have a full suite sort of offering that anyone running a fairly large or professional kind of fleet of vehicles is going to generally have some form of telematics or tracking on them. And we have invested heavily in making sure that we play a role in that ecosystem. We know that we don't want to be a siloed kind of standalone bit player. There is a driver shortage at many levels of the industry, and companies are really looking for ways to streamline their day. They know that their drivers are precious. They don't want them wasting time sort of, jumping between different apps and segregating information or communication flows. And so we've invested in being part of that. And we have integrations with, a number of those players I just mentioned: Samsara, Keep Trucking, Verizon. It's the future of where we see the industry. And I guess day one when Whiparound started, we had an inspection app and it really replaced paper. What we have now is a far more sort of comprehensive inventory, maintenance, scheduling, work order creation, connect with your suppliers, vendors, mechanics. It's really carrying the information and data from whether it's an inspection, a driver flags something's wrong, the fleet manager has the ability to connect anybody from parts ordering to repairs shops down the road to people within the organization around it, document it and have that information to report on or to present to authorities if it's a compliance issue. So going sort of deeper in that space has been our focus, and I think it's really exciting where artificial intelligence and predictive maintenance rather than proactive maintenance is starting to play in our world. And we've got some amazing people who have joined our team, even in the last sort of 4 to 6 months, that are very smart in that space. And I hope that we are able to hold our position as an ally to a lot of the transport technology out there. We don't want to step on people's toes and take too much of what they operate in. But I think we are seen as sort of a inch wide, mile deep player when it comes to what we focus on, and that's served us very well in terms of being able to align with other much more substantial technologies, and they really are looking towards the marketplace model now. They're looking to build a suite of products that their customers can pick and choose from and have the best of, rather than trying to force them into sort of their own purpose-built sort of stuff. And so that's an exciting moment for us to be in, is that our product's matured, the team is growing. We took on a good Series B round of funding late last year, so we're able to invest behind that strategy and grow our team to sort of still take what we see as an opportunity is a fair bit of green grass ahead of us as the way the technology is coming together in the sector.
No, I think there's truly like a really strong nugget of gold in what you just mentioned. And it's that you don't have to go in and try to just dominate the whole industry and try to like beat all of the competition and come in with this massive solution. It's find your niche and then partner with others that are already working in the space, that have been there for like decades, essentially, build integrations with them. I think that's such an important point that like founders can truly, I think, take some good advice from. So yeah, and in saying that, is that just kind of how it happened, or did you have mentors that guided you along this path of sticking to your niche?
Our best mentors have, in a product sense, have been our customers. Genuinely, we've got a value here at Whiparound. It's called "Be the Driver," and it's up on all of our walls. And we remind ourselves every day of that. In that, we don't want to be thinking on their behalf in our silo, thinking, well, this is what our customers should be doing. This is what drivers should be using, and how they should be doing it. We have to be really, really proactive in getting out, listening to our customers, and sitting alongside them and watching and observing as much as asking them questions, from a distance or on a Zoom call. And that's probably been where we have found most of the insights that has led our product. We've seen that they are operating a whole bunch of different technology. We've seen that when it's disparate, it's not connected, that double entry of information or jumping out of one system to get on an email to, email someone else, or picking up the phone to call something about something that could have been connected, was really what led us down the path of seeing the tidal wave of integrations and how several key functions can really be brought together and offer a much greater value proposition to the customers. So thanks to our customers, our mentors, when it comes to technology and product, I think that's really where we've got our greatest gold nuggets from over the last couple of years.
That's huge. I love that. Your customers are your greatest mentors. I actually love that, and it's so true. Like any successful company, founder that I've interviewed or spoken to, that's pretty much what they say. They said, just listen to your customers. They're going to guide you towards your revenue growth. They're going to take you from 10 million to 100 million. Just listen to your customers. That's some great stuff. Yeah. What is the future of Whiparound looking like?
Well, I probably sort of covered a bit of it in my little spiel then, but that really is it for us. We know there's a long way to go. We have some really great plans for our product, using some of the amazing technology that is out in the world right now, and understanding what that could mean for our customers who, many of them are not the most tech savvy people. And that's something that we've taken over the last couple of years, is they are not necessarily thinking of the ways technology can solve their problems, but they're very good at understanding what their problems are. And we can then potentially come in and bring some of the smarts around technology. So continuing to do that, bridging the gap between, as I touched on, sort of intelligence, artificial intelligence, machine learning, where the predictive element of the world we live in starts to have a greater impact. All of that is firmly on the roadmap for us to understand and deliver back to our customers. I think the market's so big in North America that we're really happy focusing on that. There's so much more for us to go. So many more people for us to meet. So I don't know whether you're going to be talking to me in 2 years' time and we've opened an office in London or Africa or Asia or anything like that. I mean, I'm sure there's some places I'd love to go and open an office up there, but the US really is our focal point. More than half of our team are based up there across 4 states. We've just opened an office in San Diego, which is really exciting. And we just want to keep doubling down on that and build a really good company. And I think if you focus on building a good business, everything else will kind of take care of itself. Your culture, your people, your revenue, and all of those sort of things. And we've got some far smarter people than me in the business now that are teaching me every day what that means, and we can sort of align to try and achieve it.
That's amazing. What's one piece of advice that you can provide to our early stage founders listening in?
I guess one thing, and to be absolutely honest, I still struggle with it to this day, but it's the advice component I keep reminding myself is, as you grow, you have to really learn to let go. And I think it's very hard as a founder. We get excited about, hey, finally, we've got a VP of product coming in, or we've got a CMO coming in who can take over all this marketing that we've been trying to do ourselves. As a founder, it's easy to hire someone and think that you've solved your problem, but actually allowing them the bandwidth to go and own a particular function and not necessarily do it perfectly from day one. They're not going to know as much about your customers or your product or your market as you are, but they're only probably going to learn those lessons if you give them the confidence and the trust to go and do it. And so that's been one of the great pieces of advice I've had is, hey, you need to really focus on on letting the people you bring into the business take ownership and go for it. Otherwise, you are going to hold everyone back collectively if, you've got to read every email or every advert or every proposal or nitpick every piece of product that goes out the door. And we're in a really good place because I think we've made a concerted effort to try and give people that. And it really lets people flourish and take ownership. And you hire people because they're smarter than you, right? And
Exactly.
That's what ultimately you want to get out of it.
Oh, that's really great advice. Learn to let go. Learn to let go. I love it. Tim, where can our listeners find and connect with you?
Well, hopefully you've got lots of listeners that are like, wow, I've got hundreds of vehicles that I've got sitting out in the yard and we're using paper. I'm not expecting that. I love the fact we're talking SaaS. It's a passion of mine. So, it's been great talking to you. But if anyone does want to know more about Whiparound, then whiparound.com, which is WHIPAROUND, pretty obvious, whiparound.com. And you'll find everything you need there, using all the good services of the likes of Intercom and whatnot to chat to our amazing team. So we'd love to hear from anyone, whether it's regarding a fleet or whether it's something around, business or anything we can help with or I can help with. Any lessons I've learned, always happy to, to share the love.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tim, for coming on our show.
Good stuff. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Shaheem.